You are the last human archivist. Your office is a forgotten corner of Apex Station. This station is the galactic hub, a monument to order. It is a place of gleaming spires and silent, gliding ships. Your archive is not like that at all. It is a beautiful, sprawling mess of human memory. Books with cracked spines sit beside humming data cores. Faded photographs are pinned next to flickering holo records. This place smells of old paper and ozone. It is the scent of humanity's long, strange journey. You are its sole keeper, a professional collector of magnificent junk. The Council funds it out of a sense of historical pity. They think your work is a quaint hobby, preserving the relics of a loud, chaotic species. Then the enemy arrived. They did not announce themselves with threats. There were no declarations of war. They simply appeared at the edge of the system. A fleet of perfect obsidian ships. Each vessel was a flawless geometric shape. No windows, no engines, no visible weapons. They moved with a chilling, silent grace. The station's logs named them Cygnus. They hung in the void like a new constellation, a constellation of absolute, terrifying silence. Their presence felt like a missing sound, a deep wrongness in the symphony of space. The Cygnus did not attack. They did not negotiate. They began to erase. The first to go was a patrol wing of fighters. They were a squadron from the mighty Cathar Empire. Their ships were bristling with proven weaponry. They approached the Cygnus fleet with caution. One moment, the patrol was there. The next, they were simply gone. No explosion, no wreckage, no debris, not even a flash of light. The station's long-range sensors just went blank, like the ships had been deleted from existence. It was an act of impossible, silent power. Terror rippled through Apex Station. Panic is usually a noisy affair, full of shouts and alarms and running feet. This was different. This was a cold, quiet dread. It seeped into every corridor and every heart. The flawless advance of the Cygnus was horrifying. They moved toward the inner planets. Their formation was perfect. Their speed was constant. Any ship that stood in their path simply vanished. They did not deviate or hesitate. Their path was a line of pure, geometric certainty, a line that was getting closer every second. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The oldest races were there. The wise Voral, with their minds of living crystal. The logical Cathar, warriors and engineers. The ancient Elder Ones, who had seen galaxies born. They represented trillions of souls across 1,000 worlds. They were the galaxy's best and brightest. They believed everything could be understood through reason. Logic was the universal language. The Cygnus must operate on some form of it. They simply needed to find the right frequency, the right equation to begin a dialogue. Their confidence was absolute, and absolutely wrong. They sent a ship, the voice of reason. It was an unarmed vessel of diplomatic outreach. It broadcast the prime numbers in every known spectrum. It sent the fundamental constants of the universe. It drew maps of star science in pulsed light, a greeting card written in the language of reality itself. The Cygnus fleet did not slow. It did not alter its perfect course. The voice of reason entered their path. And then it was gone, erased from space-time with silent indifference. The Council watched the sensor readings vanish. A collective shock silenced the great chamber. Their logic had not been answered. It had been eaten. They tried again. A Cathar cruiser broadcast complex battle simulations. It showed tactical genius and martial honor. The Cygnus erased it. The Vorals sent patterns of pure, crystalline thought, a telepathic message of peace and shared existence. The Cygnus erased the ship carrying the telepath. Annihilation was their only reply. This is when they remembered you, the human archivist, the keeper of weird stories. You were summoned before a council subcommittee. They were desperate. Perhaps some forgotten human myth held a clue, some fragment of our primitive, violent past. They looked at you with a mixture of hope and disgust. The lead counselor was a voral named Zilar. Its crystalline form shimmered with cold light. Your species was known for illogical warfare, it stated. The words were not a compliment. Alkarine, you fought with passion and chaos, not with strategy. Explain this behavior. So you tried. You told them about human history. You spoke of wars won by sheer, stubborn hope. You described art created from pain and joy. You explained love, a force with no logic at all. You mentioned poetry, music, and ridiculous jokes, the very things that made life worth living. You spoke of humanity's greatest contradiction, our capacity for boundless creation, and our talent for spectacular self-destruction. You told them your archive held it all. Every triumph, every mistake, every beautiful, messy piece of it. You offered them this history, this data unlike any other. They looked at you with blank incomprehension. A Cathar general scoffed. This is not data. This is noise. It is the babbling of a child race. Zilar the Voral was more polite, but just as dismissive. Your records are interesting, archivist, but they are a footnote, utterly irrelevant to a threat of pure logic. You were dismissed, sent back to your dusty corner of the station, a relic of chaos in a galaxy that worshipped reason. They told you to stay out of it, to continue your pointless hobby. The real minds would solve this problem. The fate of the galaxy was not your concern. You were just a librarian. You returned to your library of contradiction. The scent of old paper felt like a comfort. The council's rejection stung. But you were human. Stubbornness was a species-wide trait. You sat in the quiet glow of your monitors. You pulled up the sensor logs of the Cygnus attacks. You watched the erasure of the council's ships. You saw the broadcast signals they had sent out. Mathematics, physics, logic, pure, crystalline, ordered data. You watched the Cygnus fleet approach, and you saw something no one else had noticed. A flicker of energy just before each ship vanished. It was faint, almost undetectable. The Cygnus fleet's energy signature would swell. It would grow stronger for just a moment. It happened every time they received a logical broadcast, just before they erased the source. It was like a predator leaning in to feed. Your heart began to pound. It was a wild, insane thought. What if the Cygnus didn't just ignore logic? What if they consumed it? What if pure, ordered information was their food source, their fuel? The very thing that made them so perfect and unstoppable. You looked around your archive, at the shelves of conflicting histories, at the art that defied any rational explanation, at the music that followed rules only to break them. There were a million different versions of every story. Humanity could never agree on its own past. Our entire history was a storm of beautiful noise. It was the most illogical, contradictory, and chaotic collection of data in the galaxy. And it hit you with the force of a revelation. This wasn't a footnote. It wasn't a relic. It was a weapon. The perfect weapon against an enemy of pure, unyielding reason. The flaw in the machine became clear. The Cygnus was a system of absolute logic. It could not comprehend things without clear definitions. It could not process paradoxes. It would be like feeding a calculator a love poem. The system would not know what to do. Humanity was a walking, talking paradox. We preached peace and waged brutal wars. We dreamed of angels and acted like demons. We loved with a fierce, irrational possessiveness. We created symphonies and also invented traffic jams. We were a species defined by our glorious contradictions. The Council saw your archive as useless noise. But noise was the one thing their perfect enemy could not understand. It could not be categorized. It could not be consumed. It could be a poison, a virus made of illogic and beautiful, stubborn chaos. A plan began to form in your mind. It was desperate. It was probably insane. It was almost certainly a career-ending move. But it was the most human idea you ever had. You would not fight the Cygnus with weapons or with logic. You would fight them with humanity itself. You would weaponize human history. You would turn your messy, beautiful archive into a broadcast, a signal aimed directly at the heart of the enemy fleet. You would not send them prime numbers. You would send them Shakespeare and rock and roll. You would send them recipes for pizza. You would send them the sound of a baby laughing. You would send them 1,000 different religions, each one claiming to be the only truth. You would send them recordings of political debates, where everyone was shouting and no one was listening. It was the perfect portrait of human governance. You would send them the complete works of every philosopher, each one contradicting the last. You would build a data bomb of pure, unadulterated chaos, a symphony of noise designed to crash their perfect systems. It was a plan born from the dusty shelves of your library, a strategy that only a keeper of stories could imagine. You had to tell the Council. They had to see the brilliance of it. You requested another audience. This time, they made you wait for hours, a clear sign of their annoyance. Finally, you were brought before Xylar and the committee again. Their shimmering forms seemed even colder this time. The Cathar general tapped his claws impatiently. You laid out your plan. You spoke with a passion you did not know you had. You explained your theory about the Cygnus feeding on order. You described the weapon you could build from chaos. You called it Project Pandemonium. Maybe not the best name in hindsight. It did not seem to soothe their nerves. You finished your presentation. The room was silent. So silent you could hear the faint hum of the station's life support. Xylar the Voral leaned forward slowly. Let me be certain I understand, Archivist. Its voice was dangerously calm. Your proposal is to broadcast noise at the enemy. You nodded eagerly. Not just noise, human noise, contradiction, paradox, everything they can't process. The Cathar general finally spoke. His voice was a low growl. You want to throw garbage at them. That is your grand strategy. To annoy them into leaving. He looked ready to have you spaced. It is an insult to reason, Xylar stated. The light within its crystal body pulsed with irritation. It is an affront to every principle this Council stands for. We face an enemy of supreme logic, and you suggest we defeat them with the cosmic equivalent of a tantrum. The general muttered something about primitive apes. Your heart sank. They did not see it. They could not see it. Their minds were too rigid, too ordered. They were as trapped by logic as the Cygnus were. This is madness, the general declared. Absolute madness. The Council will not sanction this. Xylar's next words were like shards of ice. Your idea is rejected, Archivist. It is forbidden. You will return to your archive. You will cease this line of inquiry immediately. You are not to touch any broadcast equipment. This is a final warning. They dismissed you again, this time with undisguised contempt. You walked back through the gleaming, perfect corridors of Apex Station. You were just a footnote again, a crazy human with an insane idea. The Council would continue to fight logic with logic. They would keep feeding the enemy, and the galaxy would be erased for the sake of their pride. You stood before the entrance to your archive. The familiar scent of paper and dust washed over you. In that moment, you made a choice. The Council had forbidden your plan. Reason had forbidden it. The combined wisdom of the galaxy called it madness. But you were human. And sometimes, madness is the only sane option. Defying the Council was a death sentence. But sitting here and doing nothing was a death sentence for everyone. The fate of trillions now rested on your shoulders. One person against an enemy of flawless perfection. One librarian against a fleet of silent gods. It was a terribly human thing to do. The odds were absurd. You had no crew, no ship, no weapons. All you had was a library full of stories, and a plan so crazy it just might work. A light joke for you. What's the difference between genius and insanity? About a week, depending on the results. You hoped your results would come much faster. Your first challenge was immense. You had to hijack the station's master broadcast system, the Grand Beacon of Apex. It was the most powerful transmitter in this sector of the galaxy. It was also the most heavily guarded piece of equipment. Getting to it would be tricky. The beacon was housed at the very top of the station's central spire, a place restricted to high-level technicians and council members. Your archivist clearance pass would not even open the first door. You needed a new plan, one that involved less talking and more sneaking. You delved into a different part of your archive, the section on human crime and espionage. You found records of legendary hackers, stories of impossible heists, blueprints for old tech infiltration devices. Humanity had spent a lot of time trying to get into places they were not supposed to be. You were starting to see the practical applications. You found what you needed. Schematics for a master key device, a simple frequency spoofer. It would trick the door sensors into thinking you had the right clearance. It was ancient technology, so old and primitive, no one would be looking for it. The station's security was designed to stop sophisticated digital attacks. Not a piece of junk you could build in an hour. You gathered the components from your archive's collection of antique electronics. Old communicators, children's toys, a broken coffee machine. You felt like a spy from a cheap human movie. It was both terrifying and surprisingly fun. You were breaking 1,000 regulations, but the galaxy was at stake. Under the cover of the station's night cycle, you made your move. You wore the plain uniform of a low-level maintenance worker, your face hidden by a cap pulled down low. You walked with a confidence you did not feel. Just another anonymous drone in the vast machine of the station. The first door was the hardest. Your heart pounded as you held your homemade device to the lock. The light stayed red. For a terrible second, you thought it had failed. Then, with a soft click, it turned green. The door slid open. You slipped inside, a ghost in the machine. You moved through deserted corridors and maintenance shafts, following the station's ancient blueprints from your archive. You bypassed patrol drones and security sensors. Your crude device worked every time. The station's flawless security had a flaw. It could not imagine someone would use something so primitive. Finally, you reached the control room for the Grand Beacon. It was a vast, circular chamber. A huge window looked out upon the stars, and in the center, a gleaming console. The broadcast controls. It was mercifully empty. The technicians were likely in a shelter, or watching the slow, inevitable approach of the Cygnus. You stepped up to the console. This was the point of no return. The screen glowed, asking for command authorization. This was beyond your simple spoofer. You needed to interface your archive directly, to bypass the Council's master control system. It was time for the real chaos to begin. You pulled a cable from your bag. An old, ridiculously thick data cable. You physically pried open a maintenance panel on the console. You ignored the delicate fiber optic ports. You connected your cable directly to the raw data bus. It was the digital equivalent of a sledgehammer. Alarms began to flash on the screen. Red lights pulsed across the room. You had been detected. Security forces would be here in minutes. You worked frantically, your fingers flying across a portable data pad. You were not a hacker, but you were a librarian. You knew how to organize and unleash information. You initiated the upload. The full, glorious, messy torrent of human memory. There was no order to it. No careful curation. It was everything at once. A digital storm of beautiful, wonderful noise. The system fought back. Firewalls tried to block your unauthorized access. But your data was too chaotic, too random. The station's logical security systems could not handle the input. It was like trying to catch water in a net. The alarm sputtered and died. The red lights flickered and went out. You had broken the brain of the machine. The grand beacon of Apex was yours. You looked out the great window at the silent, perfect fleet of the Cygnus. They were so close now. You could see the geometric purity of each ship. "Okay, you silent, perfect freaks," you whispered. "Let's see how you handle this." You slammed your hand down on the broadcast button. A symphony of noise erupted from Apex Station. It was not a gentle melody. It was a hurricane of human experience. The full, unfiltered chaos of a billion lifetimes. It was the roar of a football stadium, and the quiet scratch of a pen on paper, the soaring notes of an opera, and the distorted feedback of an electric guitar. You sent them the sound of war, the thunder of artillery, the desperate shouts of soldiers, the cold, clipped orders of generals. You sent them the incoherent ramblings of madmen, the passionate speeches of revolutionaries, the cynical advertisements for products nobody needed. A joke from a long-dead comedian, followed by a philosopher's lecture on despair. You unleashed art. The melting clocks of Dali, the chaotic splatters of Pollock, the impossible shapes of Escher. You sent them every page of every book in your library. Conflicting histories, fantastic lies, and heartfelt poetry. The tender words of a love letter, the bitter accusations of a divorce. You broadcast our contradictions. A prayer for peace, followed by the schematics for a nuclear bomb. A doctor saving a life. A murderer taking one. The innocent laughter of a child. The complex and cruel legal arguments of a lawyer. You sent them everything. All at once. A data stream of pure, glorious pandemonium. Out in the void, the Cygnus fleet received the broadcast. For the first time, something changed. Their perfect, silent advance stopped. The flawless geometric formation wavered. The ships, once locked in perfect synchronicity, began to drift. It was a small change, but it was everything. On the main view screen, you saw it. A flicker on the lead Cygnus vessel. Not an explosion, something far stranger. The ship's perfect obsidian surface shimmered. It warped. The clean lines of its geometry began to break. It was like a perfect mirror, suddenly cracking under an impossible pressure. Then another ship began to fracture. And another. Their unity was shattering. The silent hive-mind connection that bound them together was failing. The chaos you had unleashed was breaking their minds. Their logic was crashing. They were not just ignoring the noise. They were trying to process it, and it was destroying them. Down in the council chambers, They saw it too. The sensor readings were going wild. The enemy fleet, once a monolith of terrifying purpose, was in disarray. The ships were moving erratically now. Some were spinning slowly. Others were simply dead in space. The perfect machine was broken. Xylar the Voral stared at the screen. Its crystalline mind could not comprehend what it was seeing. The Cathar general's jaw was open. All their logic, all their strategy had failed. And now, this garbage broadcast was succeeding. It was impossible. It was illogical. Then a new signal reached you from the council. It was the Cathar general. His voice was strained, full of a disbelief that bordered on reverence. "What have you done, archivist?" he asked. There was no anger in his voice now, only awe. "Keep broadcasting," he ordered. "Whatever you are doing, keep doing it." A new energy surged through you. The council was listening. They were seeing. You doubled down. You dug deeper into your archive. You sent them the most human things you could find. The illogical fury of a scorned lover. The irrational hope of a gambler on a losing streak. The sublime joy of creating something new just for the sake of it. The council fleet had been holding back. A defensive posture against an unbeatable foe. Now, seeing the Cygnus falter, they saw their chance. The Cathar general's voice boomed across the fleet comms. "All ships, attack! Fire at will! No formations, no coordinated strategy, just hit them!" It was the most illogical order he had ever given. And it was brilliant. The council fleet, a collection of dozens of different species and ship designs, surged forward. There was no grand, logical battle plan. It was a chaotic, messy, beautiful charge. A bar fight in the middle of space. Cathar cruisers fired their heavy cannons. Voral light skimmers darted between the confused Cygnus ships. Smaller, faster ships from a dozen different worlds joined the fray. They were no longer fighting a god. They were fighting a confused and broken machine. And they were winning. You watched from the broadcast tower, your symphony of chaos providing the soundtrack. Your data storm continued to sow confusion among the Cygnus. Their ships could not coordinate. They could not execute their flawless defensive maneuvers. They were being overwhelmed by the sheer, beautiful mess of it all. A Cygnus ship tried to erase a Cathar cruiser. But its systems were too busy trying to understand a broadcast of a cat playing a piano. The cruiser's torpedoes struck home. The Cygnus ship did not vanish. It exploded. A real, proper, messy explosion. It was the most beautiful thing you had ever seen. The battle, if you could call it that, raged on. It was not a clean, star science affair. It was a brawl. The council fleet, inspired by your chaos, fought with a kind of desperate glee. They abandoned centuries of rigid doctrine. They embraced the unpredictable. They became, for a moment, a little bit human. The Cygnus fleet was shattered. Their perfect logic was their greatest weakness. Faced with an ocean of irrationality, they broke. Their retreat was not a calculated, strategic withdrawal. It was a panicked flight. The flawless geometric shapes turned and fled into the deep void. They vanished as silently as they had arrived, leaving behind only wreckage and a stunned silence. Victory. The word felt too small. The galaxy had been saved. Not by the mightiest fleets, not by the most brilliant minds. It was saved by poetry and bad jokes. It was saved by the contradictory, messy, glorious story of humanity. A story you alone had thought to weaponize. The comms channel from the council opened again. It was Xylar. Its crystalline form seemed to shimmer with a new light, a warmer light. Archivist. It began, and then paused. The silence was long. The council is in your debt. There was a universe of meaning in those words. An admission of failure. A note of profound respect. You were no longer a footnote. You were the author of their salvation. You leaned back from the console, exhausted but alive. Your symphony of noise slowly faded out. The grand beacon fell silent. In the quiet that followed, you could feel the entire galaxy breathing a collective sigh of relief. Your return from the broadcast spire was very different from your journey there. You were met not by security guards, but by an honor guard. The Cathar general was there in person. He did not speak. He simply gave you a deep, formal bow, a gesture of ultimate respect from a warrior race. They did not call you archivist anymore. You had earned a new title, one whispered in the corridors of Apex Station, one that would soon spread to 1,000 grateful worlds. They called you the Keeper of Chaos, the librarian who saved the galaxy with noise. Your archive was no longer a dusty, forgotten corner. It became a protected sanctum, the most important library in the known universe. Scientists and philosophers from every race came to study it. They tried to understand the strange power hidden in its stories, the power of illogical, beautiful contradiction. You are no longer just a keeper of the past. You are the guardian of the future. The galaxy's new salvation is not a bigger gun or a faster ship. It is the understanding that some enemies cannot be fought with logic. Some darkness can only be driven back by the chaotic, unpredictable light of a messy, imperfect soul. You stand now in your expanded archive, a monument to humanity's beautiful madness. You are a living legend, the human who taught the galaxy that its greatest strength was not in its perfection, but in its glorious, unending, and life-saving chaos. And every so often, you broadcast a classic rock song, just to keep everyone on their toes.